The compromise talks on Vishwarupam between the Tamil Nadu government representatives, Kamal Hassan's team and protesting groups did not manage to reach a conclusion. In a preliminary meeting, the protesters demanded the presence of Kamal Hassan, who is in Mumbai. The meeting is now likely tomorrow. After a poor rainfall, onion prices have shot up. The Delhi Chief Minister has written to Agriculture Minister Sharad Pawar asking him to intervene and crack down on hoarders. The Commerce Ministry is also holding meetings to find ways of bringing the prices down. The Supreme Court said today that the sociologist Ashish Nandi cannot be arrested for remarks made by him at the Jaipur Literary Festival, squashing an FIR filed by the Rajasthan police for his comments on Dalits. The court also issued notices to 4 other states as well as the centre. A major terror strike in Turkey. A suicide bomber blew himself up right outside the US Embassy building in Ankara, killing a security guard and injuring several others. But first, our big story tonight. The government has stepped on the gas on anti-rape laws, and it's done that by bringing out an ordinance tonight which toughens some of the existing laws, but also concerns about whether it has left out other crucial changes to the laws. For more on that, Sunil Prabhu joins me live from New Delhi. He's been tracking that cabinet meeting. Sunil, if you can run us through some of the key decisions or the key points of this ordinance that the government has brought out, evidently to strengthen anti-rape laws.
That's right, Srinivasan. Some of the those amendments that have been passed and will take into effect once the President signs that ordinance. We are hoping by later tonight it will become the law of the land, of course, subject to Parliament passing it in both houses of Parliament in the budget session, which will be convening on the 21st of February. What we have been told is that they have gone a longer distance in terms of the penalty. While the Justice Verma did not recommend the death penalty, and many women's groups who are arguing against it, they have decided to go ahead and recommend the death penalty in the rarest of rare cases. Of course, it will be left to the discretion of the judge, and of course they would like to see that the convict remain for its full remainder of his life in prison when he is accused of sexual assault or one of those sexual offences. But that, of course, is the discretion of the judge. The other point where the Cabinet has not agreed with the Justice Verma committee is on the question of what they call the consent in terms of sexual assault, whether it can be considered marital rape, can be considered acceptable. They have omitted that clause because they find there needs to be a more precise and clear definition, so they haven't accepted that. But otherwise, they have broadly accepted most of Justice Verma's recommendations that have been given in the criminal law. There is a new definition for sexual harassment based on what has been passed in Parliament in the Vishakla judgment, which has been enacted by the Lok Sabha in consonance with the Supreme Court's judgment. They have also added new clauses, indecent gestures, in terms of what will be sexual assault. There's an entire section which has been defined in that, and then of course the word rape has been replaced by sexual assault completely in the IPC. So broadly, a lot of changes. They have also included they have amended the IPC for the acid attack. So a number of broad changes. Broadly, the government wants to show its political commitment, as you rightly said, right, that it wants to go ahead and make it safer for women in this country. How they go about it in the next few days, especially since this was already being discussed by the Standing Committee and it's slated to meet on the 4th. But nevertheless, it will be given opportunity for this country to look at these laws far more seriously.
Right, Sunil Prabhu, thanks very much indeed there with that breaking news coming in. So just to quickly recap before I throw this to my panel, that the government passing an ordinance tonight which brings in some changes to the existing anti-rape laws, the most significant of which is that they have recommended that the death penalty be given to what they call the rarest of rare cases of rape. They also claim to have broadened the definition of rape, and they have also managed to bring in some changes pertaining to the actual vocabulary of the definition, or whether you call it rape or you in fact call it sexual violence. But of course there are those who might feel that a lot has been left out as well. Joining me to debate that is Abhishek Manu Singhvi, Congress spokesperson, leading advocate, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Also, one of the country's leading lawyers, Soli Sorabji, joins us on the program. Also joining me is Kavita Krishnan, who is the secretary of the All India Progressive Women's Association, someone who is at the forefront of the protests after the Delhi gang rape. And also joining me, Ranjana Kumari, director of the Center for Social Research. We'll also have Siddharth Vadarajan of the Hindu, managing editor, joining us in just a second. But first, if I can come to you, Abhishek Singhvi, could you explain to us some of the rationale behind this government's rather sudden decision to have this cabinet meeting and pass an ordinance with all these changes? You had the Justice Verma Commission report. It's quite an elaborate report. One would have thought the government would mull over it and then come up with a wider set of changes in the law. But why this sudden step?
Clearly, the answer was given partly by your correspondent. Shows the commitment, the sincerity and the urgency with which the government views these things. It's a little amusing that had the government taken longer, everybody would be asking the reverse question, why are you taking longer? But the government showed alacrity in appointing the Verma Commission first. The Verma Commission did a very commendable job in a very short time, and I think the government has done the right thing. These, of course, will require the scrutiny of Parliament, so there is no problem. They will continue largely or with some minor modification. But I want to make 2 or 3 very quick points, Srinivas.
Yes.
One, that largely most of the recommendations of the Verma Committee, many of which have been accepted now, are unexceptionable and they are good and they should be brought in, and I don't personally expect any major modification in the parliamentary session to come. And many of the ones brought in now by the ordinance are therefore valid and good, and I'm not going to details for lack of time. The inclusion of the death penalty, of course, and this I am speaking personally, not as for the Congress, because the Congress has not decided on individual recommendation in that sense, is an issue, I think, because practice shows that where death penalty is involved, the rate of acquittal or the tendency to let people go off is higher. The beyond reasonable doubt test is applied.
So you're saying at the level of the Congress, at the level of the Congress, you're not fully convinced about the death penalty aspect.
This is my personal view, not at the level of the Congress. I made that very clear. But the other exclusion, I think that again is my personal view, but I'm happy at the exclusion. The exclusion of marital rape, that's more controversial. I think the whole approach of the government is get on with the less controversial issues. There are more to come which we'll discuss in Parliament. Very few countries have marital rape as an offence. In India, already, if you are separated judicially, then marital rape already is an offence.
Okay,
now, the question of consent in a non-judicially separated marriage is an issue, because we've already had problems with 498A. So it requires very impeccable policing, and absent that degree of impeccable policing, I think the jury is still out on marital rape. So I think that will go for further discussion.
Okay,
that's the summary of the whole thing.
All right, Abhishek, let me just now bring the others in, because I'm sure there will already be questions about some of the contentions you made. Kavita Krishnan, do you, first of all, what do you make, first of all, of this ordinance, the fact that they've brought it in? Do you accept Abhishek's contention that you're damned if you do and damned if you don't? And secondly, do you buy his argument that this has taken on board most of the Justice Verma recommendations? I personally can't see which recommendations of Justice Verma they've taken on, apart from perhaps broadening the definition of sexual violence.
See, I think the first thing is that alacrity is always called for, but alacrity doesn't mean stealth and selectivity. Okay, so you do it suddenly. I'm hearing suddenly that at night this ordinance is going to become a law, and the process, the 1 month long excellent process adopted by Justice Verma, you are undoing a whole lot of that, undermining it by a few hours long cabinet meeting in which you are cherry picking, and not only cherry picking, you are kind of drawing things out of the air and adding. Now, on the specific recommendations which I think are crucial to the spirit of Justice Verma,
and which you believe that the ordinance has left out.
I don't know, I haven't seen the ordinance, but from what I hear, from what you're telling me, I can only respond to what based on what you're reporting. Now, I think that the first thing is that the Justice Verma recommendations, what is new about them is that they are redefining sexual violence from the perspective of women's autonomy, bodily integrity and dignity, rather, and taking it firmly out of the whole paradigm of modesty and honor and shame and all of that. Now, crucial to that is not just a word, crucial to that is the definition of consent, which Justice Verma has recommended, which is a completely new thing, whereby consent is explicitly yes or no by word or gesture. Okay. Now that is something which should come into the law. I don't know if the ordinance is bringing it in or not.
It doesn't seem to be at this stage.
Now the other thing is regarding expansion of sexual violence. Now I'm saying it's not just about replacing rape with sexual assault. The point is that the penetrative sexual assault, that you're supposed to expand that to cover rape by instruments as well, and also you're supposed to bring in the whole range of, now is disrobing included in this ordinance, is voyeurism included in this ordinance? I didn't hear that.
So let's before we get into the specifics.
No, but on marital rape specifically, I think it's important.
I want to come to marital rape, and that's a whole debate in itself, but I want to throw back
one sentence, Srinivasan.
Yeah, 1 second. Abhishek, I want to just throw the
only one sentence.
The main contention.
Please don't think
the main contention that Kavita has made,
conversion of the Verma Committee recommendations.
Sorry?
Yes.
I just want to throw the main contention that she's made.
Not a conversion of the Verma Committee recommendations. Yes. They've only picked up a few. The rest will happen in the parliamentary session. So don't think this is exhaustive by any means. That's all I'm saying.
No, but what do you make of her contention that this has been brought in by stealth, this has been brought in by haste, this is cherry picking? And this is not respecting the elaborate efforts that the Justice Verma Commission has put in.
How can we say that?
How can a cabinet meeting every Thursday or Friday be described as decision by stealth? This is the only known decision-making process. Ordinances are open for the public and they will be ratified by Parliament. The mistake is to assume that the ordinance is exhaustive listing of the Verma recommendations. The ordinance only takes out a few which it considers unacceptable.
Okay, Siddharth Varadarajan wants to make a quick point.
I would be curious to know how many days in advance was this draft ordinance circulated to different ministers. Certainly one is in touch with ministers all the time. One has never heard of this until today.
Yes.
It's quite possible that this was brought and shown to them for the first time today. And if that is indeed the case, and I hope it's not, I hope that this draft was with them for a week. I think it does smack of unseemly haste. And I'm afraid I cannot see the logic of moving so quickly in such a manner when you have a deliberative process that existed until now, and when Cabinet also provides for a deliberative mechanism through the circulation of drafts.
Yes.
I can't see why any of that has been sidestepped.
Okay, can I just bring in Soli Sorabji here? Mr. Sorabji, what do you make of the manner in which this ordinance has been brought in? We are going to get into the nitty-gritties of it in just a second, including this decision to award the death penalty in the rarest of rare cases. But do you accept the view of Siddharth Varadarajan and of Kavita Krishnan that this is not the manner in which it should have been done?
Actually, I think this whole discussion is bizarre.
Okay.
Who has seen the ordinance? Have you examined it? Do you know what provisions are included, excluded?
We have the gist of it.
I don't think to say it's done by stealth. Sorry?
We have the gist of it, sir. We know the gist of what the ordinance
broadly. You know what I mean to say is, ordinance, in order to show possibly, to convince the public of the government's commitment, sense of urgency and all that. And mind you, ordinance is not the last word of the subject. It will be reviewed by Parliament. Suppose the idea was to keep up the momentum, to give effect to some of the recommendations of the Verma Committee about which there is really no disagreement. Marital rape, problematic, so they're left out. And about murder, please, capital sentence. Don't forget Justice Verma has made it clear. The if rape is coupled with murder, 302 comes in and there is a capital sentence. Now there are many issues which you have to examine. Have they broadened it? Have they narrowed it? Have they increased the punishment? If they increase the punishment, to what extent? So I feel, Srinivasan, actually you can't really go into the details, except I do agree with this. If the ordinance has been brought out, not so quickly, I mean, but after some time, it would have shown more earnest application of mind on the subject, but that by itself does not really impart any infirmity to the ordinance.
Oh, okay. Well, isn't that the whole point though, sir, that the manner in which it has been brought out in such haste that it's very difficult for us sitting here to really go into the details, since it's just come in a very bald bullet point manner. And I think that primarily is what makes it hard to justify the entire process, given that it is the culmination of a very long exercise.
A very brief response to what Mr. Sorabji said. Perfectly right. He hasn't seen the ordinance. I haven't seen the ordinance, and yet later tonight it's going to become a law. when none of us has seen what it is saying. It is not what the Justice Verma committee has come up with after a process. So this is something no citizen of India has seen, and it's going to become a law tonight. This is very, very disturbing to me, and I think that the requisite application of mind and process that is called for, and to say that controversial things will be missed out. Anything that disturbs the patriarchal status quo is going to be controversial. All right, whether it is including marital rape is not just some kind of added additional thing. It's about recognizing a woman's personhood and autonomy over her own body, whether she is married or whether she is not. This is not something which can be an if or but. Right. This is crucial.
Can I just ask you, Abhishek Singhvi, that you already have the Standing Committee of Parliament on Home, which is sitting over precisely the changes to the Criminal Amendment Bill, which are meant to bring in a raft of changes pertaining to anti-rape laws. They're having a meeting on Monday, in fact. Isn't this ordinance going to provoke them into challenging this decision of the government just the weekend before they're holding a meeting and say, look, this goes against the spirit of Parliament?
Srinivasan, I think there is some misunderstanding about the very process of ordinance lawmaking, which has to be clarified. Ordinance by definition, and if you read the two articles of the Constitution, 123 and 213, is defined as intermediate urgent legislation bypassing Parliament. By definition, therefore, it means that it has to be urgent and immediate, and there is no question of discussing ordinances in select committees, standing committees, or for weeks on end. Second point which is missed out is that this ordinance is passed based upon a painstaking exercise of 1 month by the Verma committee, which has got 25, 30, 40 recommendations.
But how?
They simply plucked out a few which they think can stand the test of time for 3 weeks. Thirdly, this whole process of the Standing Committee and of Parliament will start at the end of February. Everything the Standing Committee does, or a new bill introduced in Parliament, or which Parliament changes, will supplant and replace the ordinance.
No, but
so
then
really what you are doing is you are saying,
but that's the whole point. Then why
five things out
you're
of
saying
40
that this
can go on now?
This is the culmination of a process of justice. Justice Verma took a month, but the government seems to have taken literally 48 hours for the ordinance. Have they had time to deliberate over Justice Verma?
Because they had the Justice Verma committee recommendations before them, on which they have plucked out 5 or 6 things. They have, Srinivasan, the Justice Verma committee recommendations, of which they have plucked out 5, 6, 7 things which they think in their wisdom are unacceptable. The exercise of the time period of 1 month is already preceded to the ordinance.
Alright, I'll just come to all of you in just a second, but we've just got a reaction from the Law Minister Ashwini Kumar talking about precisely this just a few minutes ago. Let's play that for you and we'll come back to our debate.
The Cabinet has decided to recommend to Honourable the President the promulgation of an ordinance which will contain the original provisions of the Criminal Law Amendment Ordinance that was being considered by the Standing Committee of Parliament, and will also contain most of the recommendations of the JS Verma Committee. We believe that this is a progressive piece of legislation and is consistent with the felt sensitivities of the nation in the aftermath of the outrageous and most brutal incident in Delhi. The UPA government has assured the nation that it would act with the utmost expedition upon receipt of the Verma Committee.
Right, so the Law Minister formally confirming that ordinance. Can I just go across to Ranjana Kumari, who's not had a chance to come in yet. Ma'am, what do you make of the bringing in of this ordinance? Do you believe, as some in the panel do, that this was done in haste, this is cherry picking, or do you believe that this is the government actually walking the talk when it comes to anti-rape legislation?
Well, Srinivasan, you cannot, ignore the politics of it, because we all knew from Justice Verma himself that there was the government official did not take his commission seriously. There was no response from them. Prime Minister took days to respond to and write to him. He did not receive the report himself, and there were so many, and also, of course, the anger across. So certainly something had to be done, and that is why immediately the ordinance has been brought. So we are not damning them for bringing the ordinance, but what is it that they selected to bring? That is the whole issue. The issue is that there was already pending, number of these recommendations which are already were already pending in the Parliament for 7.5 years. Fine, there was nothing that was hurting anybody to bring those in, but Verma Commission is a very comprehensive report.
Yes.
It is not just a report to say you change the definition of rape. It is not a report to say just so what you didn't bring in that what hurts you. That means that the politicians who are sitting in different elected houses, whether it is state assembly or parliament, that will hurt, because if you bring an ordinance
so you're
to say
saying
that they should be debarred from contesting election. Wait, one more minute, because you gave me the Srinivasan last chance.
Yes.
Now, second thing is about the consent, the whole idea of women's bodily. I mean, I think Kavita said it, that you don't want to even recognize that. You don't even want to, and then bringing in the whole issue of the populist thing to say, okay, fine, we have accepted the rapist must be hanged. This is what the message is through the ordinance.
Can I get?
And let me tell you, I have also not read the ordinance, so I really don't want to say anything very definitively for this particular program. But by tomorrow morning, we all will know what is happening.
Let's just get Abhishek.
Death penalty was already there. If it is there is already there. It was already there. If there is rape and murder, so 302 will be applicable.
Okay, so let's get Abhishek to respond.
So what kind of a
Let's get Abhishek to respond to all the points that you're making. Abhishek, some of our panelists seem to be unconvinced that this ordinance has in fact incorporated any of Justice Verma's substantial arguments, and they believe that what has been left out is out of political expediency.
How do we know without reading it?
That's because
that's true.
Srinivasan,
Yes.
apart from the fact that we don't know all the details, but I do agree that this would have a much shorter list in the ordinance than in the Verma Commission. But that is because the phrase left out is wrong. There is no leaving out. An ordinance is only an interim measure of those 5 or 7 items out of some 30 or 40 items which Verma Commission has listed, which the government believes are relatively non-controversial and can be implemented even without the slightest parliamentary scrutiny.
Okay.
You are again and again thinking that this is the end.
Right.
This is the beginning. That's the whole fallacy. And in the beginning, if you have 5 out of 30 and you have the other 25 taken up after just 3 weeks, and then you will have an opportunity to add those 25 or even to modify these 5, I see no reason for cavilling.
Okay,
what is the problem?
this is
are
just
any of these
But the law
5,
minister
except
said
of
most
course,
of it is included.
personally I have expressed my view about
Your
that
law
penalty.
minister,
Are any of these 5 wrong?
Okay, Siddharth Varadarajan, they at least taking the first step, bringing in those on which there will be political consensus. Why not give them credit?
Vasu, one of the strong points of the Verma Committee report was the broad, holistic view that it took. To reduce that report and everything it had to say, for example, on police reform, on the responsibility of the security forces or commanders of security forces to ensure that rape doesn't happen on their watch. To reduce that to a few changes in the law. I'm not saying those changes aren't necessary, and as Mr. Sorabji says, we don't know what they are yet.
Right.
So I don't want to commit either way.
No, but he's saying this is just the first step.
I'm saying
preclude those other changes.
my fear is that, and this was the fear that all of us expressed editorially as well, that a complex report of the kind that Verma and his colleagues produced has some changes that are relatively easy to do, but it's the broad structural changes that he wants that he recommends, which have to be, you cannot lose sight of that. And my fear is that there is a certain political gain that the Congress and the UP is obviously going for, and I think death penalty is part of that process, because it's clear that there is a public opinion perhaps favors this.
Right. And
so here you have an example of the government playing to the gallery on this issue.
I'll just come to you in a second, Kavita. If I can just go across to Mr. Sorabji. Mr. Sorabji, the fact that the Standing Committee of Parliament is meeting on the criminal amendment bill, which contains many of the similar provisions, many similar changes in the pipeline, is that going to come into conflict with this ordinance?
No. I think, Srinivasan, I don't think you've understood the object of the ordinance. You have used the word cherry picking. Now, which cherries have they picked? Which cherries have they excluded? The whole question is, this is not the final word. It's an interim measure maybe to show the public that they are very serious, they are committed. They brought it in. Now, to the extent that there are recommendations of the Verma Committee which are not really capable of serious dispute, it's a good measure. Besides, this is not the final word. It will be having parliamentary scrutiny. For example, I'm very anxious to know what have they done about the sanction. Was it necessary for ABSA, where military personnel commit rape? I'm very interested to know that. I don't know it, so what do I comment?
It's not there.
I think we should meet again When we all read the ordinance, we'll meet you again tomorrow or the day after.
Okay, the thing is, to just recap, because several of you have raised this question mark over what the ordinance contains. Let me just recap what we reported at the outset and what my colleague Sunil Prabhu summarized for us, which is that number one, this ordinance will recommend the death sentence in extreme cases. The term rape will be replaced by sexual assault. Acid attacks and other forms of violence against women will be included within the definition of sexual assault, but it will leave out marital rape. At the moment, the ordinance makes no mention of that, as well as all the recommendations on AFSPA and all of that has been left out of this ordinance. So that's in a gist what the ordinance says and what it doesn't say. Kavita Krishnan, come in very quickly.
I want to make the point that firstly, the question of the criminal law amendment bill, even that process, the standing committee process that you're talking about, is actually, why doesn't the standing committee discuss the Justice Verma recommendations? Why wasn't Justice Verma given the criminal law amendment bill to say, okay, now you adopt a process on that? So there's this parallel process, which is all an attempt, this ordinance as well as the standing committee, that's all an attempt to basically several track, so that the Justice Verma recommendations become undermined and diluted, number one.
Is that too cynical of you?
No, I don't think so at all. I don't think so at all. And I'm saying that about this thing about it's being a start. I'm saying there are some things with which you could have made a start. Why not start with that? Right. You could have had an ordinance prohibiting the two-finger test and other kinds of demeaning tests for women. That required an ordinance, and that could have been done right away tomorrow, but they haven't done that.
Okay, last word from Ranjana Kumari. Ma'am, you wanted to come in before we wrap. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say that if it is just the beginning and it's just the ordinance to just say that most convenient points have been taken in and then rest will be discussed in the parliament, then certainly there will be a controversy about all the other three very major issues that we have been saying from the very beginning.
Right.
That, you know, the whole issue of politicians, issue of the personnel in uniform, issue of marital rape, then all those issues that we have been saying are the serious effort by the report to change the way the mindset is about it. And secondly, implementation, you know, how are they ensuring that, you know, by bringing all this, okay, fine, you passed an ordinance. The problem is in terms of implementation, has there been any effort to create the mechanism by which all these things that have been said will be implemented? Yes. That's where we are failing. We are failing in terms of our systems in criminal justice system, in law enforcement system. So in all that, what is government planning to do? Is it that they are going to invest something in that? Is money being put on the table?
Right.
Or it is just been a talk that, okay, fine, the most convenient thing is pass an ordinance, and they have passed it. Okay, we welcome it.
Okay, so we're completely out of time. So in essence, is this ordinance a red herring which is only selectively picking up some of the aspects of the Verma Commission report and leaving out more radical changes? Or is the government genuinely committed to those changes? Perhaps too early to say tonight, but obviously a story that we're going to keep an eye on. Thank you very much indeed, all of you, for joining us. Ranjana Kumari, Kavita Krishnan, Siddharth Varadarajan, Soli Sorabji and Abhishek Singhvi. Thanks very much indeed. Moving on now to another one of our big stories. The row over Salman Rushdie not being allowed to appear at the Kolkata Literary Festival has escalated. Rushdie today issued a statement saying that he was clearly asked to stay away from the festival or that he would be put on a plane and sent back, and that the police leaked details of his itinerary to sabotage his visit. But the Trinamool Congress says that they congratulated the state government for blocking him.